All right, good morning. Welcome to Supply, Deliver, Build. I am pleased to share the stage this morning with a few longtime supply chain professionals and subject matter experts with many years and heaps of experience servicing the construction industry and the building materials supply industry. Today, we'll be discussing not only the challenges and common pitfalls in the supply chain of the construction and supplies industry, but perhaps more importantly, the opportunities to get ahead of some of these challenges and more effectively source and deliver the materials that you need to complete your projects on time, on budget, and also to get the materials to your downstream buyers if you're in the wholesale side of things. So without further ado, I will pass it over to our CEO, El Chang, to get us started off with some introductions.
All right. So my name is El Chang. I'm I run the ship at TGL. Moved my first shipment in this country in 1997. And pretty much moving stuff is all I've ever done. It's the only thing I know how to do. And I've worked across every single continent, being a logistics guy. There probably hasn't been a single market that I haven't touched. Really enjoy the experience of moving freight.
Thank you, Lar, and thank you, Andy. My name's Nick Freight. Yes, freight is the name and freight is the game, believe it or not, even though it's spelled a little bit differently. I've been in the business, almost embarrassed to say, nearly 40 years, so it's a long time. I've seen the industry evolve in many different facets. I've been a sales guy, I've been a sales manager, I've been a trade lane director, and the longest gig that I had was a managing director of a multinational freight forwarder, and now I'm happy to work with Lar again. Lar was one of my trainee sales guys. I like to recruit people from university that have an international passion for anything international, and that's how Lar came across. And I'm very proud to see what he's done in his career and having his own business. It's not easy. With international freight, I think you're all here, you're looking at products or you're selling products, and you're looking for new products. And one of the things that people tend to forget about is the international logistics. What's involved. And I've got this great product. It's cost $1,000. Oh, it's going to cost me $1,000 to get it here. Oh, okay. So you've got to work that part out. Once you've nutted that part down, then it gets a little bit easier on understanding. And once you've done it a few times, you get to understand what's involved and what can go right and what can go wrong sometimes. Because you've got international countries, you've got regulations, you've got customs, you've got transportation, you've got delivery, you've got warehousing. So we can expand the whole supply chain in any way that you want it. You want it port to port, we'll give you port to port. You want it X works, we'll give you X works. You want it door to door, you want it delivered duty paid, you want it delivered duty unpaid, whatever the terms are with your supplier. You have different trading terms with them. And so we can work that part of the process for you and with you. So we're here to take any questions later on, and we'll do that. And if you need services or you want to compare services, because the market right now, with what Trump is doing, and he's doing it for his very good reasons, for America, and it does have a part on the global stage. So people are interested in what's going on. So that's a bit of a long-winded introduction. So thank you for that, and I'll just pass you back to Andy.
And my name is Andy Callaway. I am a client advisor and principal consultant here at TGL. So helping Australian importers primarily access new markets, as well as Australian exporters accessing new overseas markets as well. My background before my time at TGL, spent most of my career back in the US with Home Depot as a supply chain analyst. So looking after their downstream distribution, largely with the timber B2B channels. So really thrilled to be here and taking things global. So Well, with that being said, I'll start with you. Being in the supply chain seat, right? What is your top-down assessment of the current state of the construction industry in Australia? And particularly your assessment of some of the supply chain challenges that are driving that current state?
That's a big question. So from what I can only speak from what we've seen from our construction-related customers. Throughout the COVID years, it's really did a massive doozy on the construction industry. It did a doozy on most industries, let's face it that way. But what we saw was basically the number one crunch was the reliability of supply and the ability to get those supply to market efficiently and get the builds done. A lot of things were on hold. Prices skyrocketed 10x, which has never been seen in the history of logistics. It just doesn't happen. When you're in construction, if you any folks who are listening who are in construction, you know better than me that once you sign a build, it's just not, it doesn't take a week, unless you're China, of course. It takes years, right? And you have to get those costs in check, both your materials, your labor, and most importantly, your logistics. And unfortunately, logistics is often the last thought in the entire process. And nobody predicted that freight pricing was going to go 10x, right? And that was a huge burden on a lot of the SME construction companies. From the bigger guys, they've got enough contracts to secure them and so forth. The customers will always go back to them because they're larger. It's more so the SME that suffered greatly through the experience of COVID. More often than not, the SME are so, entrenched and invested in securing more business. It's very rare that they start looking at their supply and how to secure their supply better, right? They simply don't do it as well as the larger multinationals or the bigger builds, right? So this is what we've seen. So what we've seen today, as a result of that, that industry or that sector still hasn't recovered. And this is why we have such a housing crisis in Australia, right? Government wants all these builds, but there's no one to build it. And people are still going under as we speak in the construction sector. So this is what we've seen from the customers we've managed over the years. And I guess I'll probably wrap it up at that on that question.
So when we think about the different aspects that you've got to consider to streamline your operation and really have confidence and control of what you're doing sourcing overseas, you kind of break it down into accessing your inventory, making sure that's available, make sure that the whole process is profitable and makes sense for you business-wise in the first place. And then once all that has been considered, you've got to figure out how to actually get it to your project site, especially if you're directly in the construction space. So Nick, kind of beginning with the inventory piece and making sure you actually have access to the materials that you need. You spoke a little bit about purchasing terms. Could you speak a little bit more about the advantages when negotiating suppliers with different Incoterms and purchasing terms?
Andy, that's a good question. I mean, look, if you want control of your international supply chain, then you need to change your Incoterms. If you can't be bothered with it, then you're in the hands of the supplier and whatever terms and relationships they have with the freight forwarders over there, at their origins, or with the shipping lines. So most large companies, small to large, want to have control. So that's why we're here, and that's what we can do to help you. Okay, so you know your product better than we do. You know what you want, you know where it is, you've gone overseas or you've come around here, you say, I want this. Then the next step is, okay, this is what's going to cost me, for the product. I want to control the shipping. And by having control of the shipping and the local cost, you can fine-tune the cost of the whole supply chain project, if you like. Okay, so that's very important. And you need someone that can also guide you through the processes, because if you control it here, then we could service you where it's going through the shipping line. We give you visibility of your shipments, and that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later on. You need visibility, you need the tech, you need to go in there and have a look, where's my product? Okay, we've got TGL, they're moving it now, they've picked it up, It's going to the port. It's now being loaded. It's on a ship. Okay, it's actually arrived at port. What's the hold up? Customs have got a hold on it. They want to have a look at it, or the border, the biosecurity people want to have a look at it, and we can hold your hand through that process. And that's what's important. I think you need to have control of your trading terms and of the supply chain.
So if I can just add to what Nick just said correctly, so it's probably, if anyone is listening, if you can just take away one message away from this talk, and it's going to be sounding very basic to our colleagues who are in the industry, but to a lot of the importers, this is still something that they do not manage very well. If there's one fact you can take away from this talk, is when you're sourcing from overseas, never ever agree on CFR terms. Just don't do it, because it's going to come back and bite you on the backside. All right. The terms who you should be going for are very simple. Two terms: Ex Works or FOB. Anything else, forget about it. Why? Because those are the only two terms that will give you full control and full visibility of your cost through the entire supply chain. If you do any other terms, you lose control, you lose visibility, and usually, from what we see, 9.9 times out of 10, you'll be paying more than what you thought you were going to pay. If this is one message, you guys have to take this home, guys. Do not ever do CFR. Even if supplier wants you to do it because they ship 1,000, 1 million containers around the world, they know how to do it. No. Your suppliers are grading, supplying the product you need. They are not shipping experts. Most of these, my wonderful colleagues, suppliers here on this floor, they will offer you CFR. Most of them will get paid to move your cargo with their forwarder. They don't pay them, they get paid. It's called the rebate system. But someone always pay at the end of the day. It is you, the importer. So if it looks too good to be true, don't do it. All right? So I think I'll cover on that.
Well said.
And we see this every day where companies, they reach out to us and they purchase products from overseas. And they were sold on CFR terms, and oftentimes, as you mentioned, the logic behind that is, well, we don't have to worry about the freight, or the ocean freight in particular. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? Face value, that sounds great, until you've only been notified that the container containing your products has already arrived at Sydney Port. You're beginning to incur detention charges that those CFR terms leave with you, and all of a sudden you're scrambling to find a solution, scrambling to get it customs clear, which that also leaves in your responsibility. And as the guys mentioned, FOB and Ex Works, it gives control, whereas an importer control is frankly needed. So we mentioned a little bit about customs holds in particular there. What kinds of questions should importers be expecting from their service providers to ensure that they've got their hands around avoiding customs holds and DAF holds and getting the products to market as soon as they possibly can?
Well, customs hold, obviously no private entity or public entity outside of public, in terms of public service, can control that. Only the Australian Border Force or any border force can control that. So no company can, carte blanche offer you guys, oh yes, move with us, there'll be no customs hold. That's a simple, bold-faced lie. Doesn't happen. It's out of everyone's control. If it's customs hold, it's customs hold. But how do you mitigate it? But you've got to understand the regulations surrounds your product. What are your tariffs? What are your certificates that you require? Fumigation, stink bug season, all of that. A reputable forwarder who knows your industry, who moves from your country or deals with the style of factory you guys deal with, who have presence on the ground from where you're importing, would have all that information like a starter pack. So when you switch between one provider to another, I also often say the telltale signs is you've got to see how they start you up. How are they giving you a plethora of information that's almost like, like a well-oiled machine type of thing. If you're getting that sensation and feeling, you're with the right guys. But if you're sort of the salesperson in front of you, done the song and dance, but then comes time where you push the go button, and all of a sudden things becomes a bit quiet, or you don't know what the next steps are. That's usually a sign that tells you you're working with someone that really isn't well oiled in properly implementing your business. I often tell my sales guys, I go, guys, when we carry a shipment for anyone, remember it's just not a container of tools or a container of grading or a container of sealants. It's someone's livelihood. right? It's great responsibility and it's great pride that we do it. So any logistics company worth their weight needs to have a well-oiled internal SOP that makes you feel secured and comforted and make sure the transparency is there.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, with any new business, we want to do a proper implementation. And that's discuss with you what you want, how do you want it done, who do we talk to, who do we message, how do we get you set up on our online portal, what reports you need, what landed costings you require. So everything is done. We want to make sure that, you know, that Murphy's Law doesn't get involved and we just handle all these pre-shipment issues before we start shipping.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned landed costs, Nick, because once you've found the right supplier overseas, you've addressed a lot of the service concerns and the purchasing term considerations that we've discussed. Once you get to that point, what are all of the considerations that importers should be taking into account to calculate their total landed cost? And if you're managing a project directly to keep that project on budget, or if you're in the wholesale space, arriving at a price point that's going to make your business whole?
Well, I mean, look, the first thing to do is do a shipment, do a trial shipment. You've done all your maths, you've got your pricing from us, you work out how many widgets are in a box and how many boxes are in a container. And it's pretty easy, I guess, to work out the numbers. It's a mathematical equation, and we can get, okay, this widget's cost me, landed from Vietnam, from China, from US. We've got it down to the fine art. We've got your invoice, your supplier invoice. We've got everything we need, and we can just press a button with the smarts that La has with the TGL. We can just press a button and give you that straight away. So if you know that this widget's cost you $1, okay, landed. What's it cost me landed here? It's $1.20. Okay, all right. So that's how easy it is, the service that we can provide for you.
Anybody out here that has imported anything, ever interacted with ocean freight in any way, there's some seasonality involved. There's just, geopolitical forces. There's just the sheer demand that accompanies, the time around Christmas and Chinese New Year. How can importers in Australia and in the construction space anticipate and plan accordingly for the fluctuations in the ocean freight market?
Well, that's a great question. Okay. So as a business, we started focusing a lot on social media from a very early on. I mean, we're talking maybe 6, 7, even maybe 8 years ago, we started doing social media. And that's a very rare phenomenon in the logistics sector, because as logistics companies, we're great at driving a truck or know a hole between here to there, but we're not very good at marketing ourselves, because I can point in one person here and ask them what logistics is. I can guarantee you I'll get 10 different answers. So we decided to educate our customers in terms of understanding what to look for, what's coming up. I must say, when I first joined the industry back in the mid-90s, we can go on years and years and selling freight and moving stuff without needing to talk about geopolitics, right? It's just completely foreign. But today, unfortunately, you can't. And the days of how you deal with your freight provider, where you just go, I'm importing this, give me a rate, is your rate good? Okay, let's move it. If you're still dealing that way, you got to stop, because you're going to get your backside handed over to you. No logistics person, or one that understands how quickly the world moves today, can go on a day-to-day basis without understanding geopolitics, because it happens. Trump says something, bang, immediately we have an effect within 2 weeks. That's how quickly things are shifting and molding. So what we do is we actively research internally through various departments, understanding those things, and talk to all of our suppliers, from shipping lines to airlines to our overseas partners and our own offices overseas in Asia, understanding how these things are happening from a geopolitical level, and then how that's trickling down to actual industry. We don't always get everything accurate and precise, but we are at least talking about it, understanding, or trying to get our head around it. And then we bring that information to our customers, be it personal one-on-one or through our YouTube channel, that we deliver these market updates and so forth. Is it a foolproof way? Absolutely not. But I always say to fix a problem, you've got to start talking about it. You've got to try to start understanding it rather than bury your heads in the sand.
So another consideration with freight market fluctuations is contract rates. A lot of importers, especially importers that do substantial volume, talking many hundreds of containers, they typically seek out contract rates with the shipping lines because it makes operations fairly predictable, right? You have a consistent rate you're paying for import around the year. However, there are certain disadvantages to that. Like right now, for instance, one byproduct of the current trade turmoil is that freight rates are very low right now. And in fact, on the spot rate market, rates are often lower than what a lot of importers are achieving on a contract basis. What considerations should importers take when weighing up, contract rates versus actually utilizing the current market?
Contract rate versus spot rate, this is something that if you're a seasoned importer with volume, you should know exactly what we're talking about. But for those of you who don't, is basically if you've got more volume, the shipping lines will sign a special deal for you that sort of have special considerations or set for a certain amount of period with only marginal increases versus the spot rate. Spot rate, you're just playing with the market. But to be very concise, my advice to all importers or exporters, if you're doing less than 2,000 containers a year, forget about contract rate. Shipping lines aren't going to give you a contract rate. And in fact, anyone that tells you that you're getting a contract rate, if you're doing less than 2,000 containers a year, they're again lying. Play the spot, in fact. Even if you can get a contract rate, I would say this year and next year, play spot, because spot is going to be better than contract. Because contract rates, for example, for argument's sake, you're going to be paid, say, for example, $2,500 throughout the year. Whereas if I'm asking you to play spot rate, you're going to be paying lower in certain months and you're going to be paying higher in other. The current state of affairs this year and next year, playing spot, you're going to come off better than contract rate if you can get a contract rate. Work with someone who actually will keep you updated with what the trend is. And of course, if your volume is big enough, we'll go get a contract rate. But understand that we've spoken to all the carriers privately and openly. They will not give contract rate if you move less than 2,000 containers a year.
Before we get into duties and free trade agreements, Law, would you mind maybe shedding some light on how import GST is calculated for those that may be under the impression that it's only based on the commercial invoice value?
Given most countries that Australia trades with has a free trade agreement, the duty component that goes into working out your GST payable is sort of almost negligible. It's usually the CI value plus the duty applicable, then you plus the 10% on top of that. So by and large, you're not going to be too off the mark. If you just work off a commercial invoice, CIF value, 10%, you've got your GST payable on the goods, right? Because if you're dealing with a free trade agreement country, for example, we've got free trade agreements with US, well, we had.
I don't think we're charging them anything to come in, right? It's only if we got that stuff there.
I can't keep up. We got free trade agreements with China, with Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, New Zealand, not in New Zealand, and a host of others. But basically, those are the usual suspects where you're going to be importing from anyway. So there is a lot of free trade agreements out there, and I know the government's pushing for more European free trade agreements, although the volume out of Europe isn't that great for Australia.
Another important consideration with taking advantage of these free trade agreements and ensuring that the goods you bring in are duty exempt is a COO, Certificate of Origin. So basically, it's important always to remember that the country that you're purchasing from can't just be a pass-through country for these goods. It needs to be the point where they were actually manufactured to take advantage of these agreements. So when importers have got the shipping costs considered, they've got the import taxes and duties considered, they found the right supplier, they've calculated the right price point, or kept their project on budget, at least on paper. From that point on, what can importers do to align the shipping schedule and cadence with their project timelines? And what can their providers do to ensure that that happens?
it's just communication. Well, I mean, one of our key messages for this talk we're wanting to really project out is that for far too often when we talk to our construction clients or related to construction, freight is often an afterthought. It's like an after dinner mint. You know, they will talk about everything else and they will loop in a freight guy and they start going for the bottom rate. And it's like, well, the freight's probably the most important part of the conversation. You loop this in way too late and you want the cheapest freight and you want magic to happen. It doesn't work that way. Things go very slowly in the freight world. So my recommendation to everyone is that just start the conversation where you start planning the project, because there's so many more areas where you can save money, especially the intangibles. It could be an extrusion or it could be some sort of something you're building that if you configure it in a certain way, you get maximized utilization of the container space. As opposed to, well, this is the product, how do you move it? How do we move this over? Well, I don't have much room to maneuver. Then all I can do, compare myself to my next guy who's competing, is probably save you $50, $100 on a container. That's peanuts, guys, to your bills. Peanuts. But if you told me, hey, we're looking at this thing, we want to build this thing, we're engineering it this way, how do we maximize it so that we pack it in this way to the container so we can squeeze more? Now, this is where you're really going to get your efficiencies. It's not playing one person off with the other guy and saying for a couple $100. You're really focusing on the sesame and not the kahuna here, right? We come across a client, who hires 2 full-time staff to simply go to market on every time they book a container and go for the cheapest forward that puts that money in. And it's like, you're pinching pennies, just trying to save 20, 30, 40, 50 US dollars, and you've got 2 full-time staff to go and do that exercise. It's madness, absolute madness. But, what can you do? You can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. For us, it's just about communication. Look for savings where you've got a forwarder provider in logistics. Yes, we move freight. But within how we move it, we've got so much intelligence that we have on how you can move things efficiently. That's where you're going to save the money, not trying to play one forward off another. Because invariably, you're going to find someone who's going to be willing to do it for nothing. And it's usually that person who's willing to do it for nothing you don't want to work with. We had a forwarder recently that went bankrupt because they sold their pants off to this big move of freight, because they were using it for 90 days credit and probably making $10 USD on a container. This is not how you work with your suppliers. If you don't respect your business, then do it. If you respect your business, find savings through efficiency, not through playing one right off another. Those days are gone. If we're in the 70s, 80s, 90s, do it. Right? World was a simpler place back then. Not in 2025.
And I mean, just adding to that, I mean, you also run the risk of having your containers blocked, somewhere, right? Blocked overseas, blocked in Australia. The shipping lines, the ports, they all want their money. And so at the end of the day, saving, you may save some money on the international freight, but it could cost you a hell of a lot more in other unforeseen expenses.
So, as we kind of approach time here with a little less than 15 minutes to go, I believe, would like to open up the floor to questions. If anybody has any specific supply chain related topics.
Thank you. You spoke about penny pinching in relation to getting a cheaper rate for shipping. And over COVID, I became familiar, unfortunately, with terms blank sailings or slot hoarding. Can you talk a little bit about that and how to avoid it? Because I had a situation where the freight forwarder would say, they want $20,000 to ship a box from China to Australia.
That's a great question. All right, now we're getting to the weeds. During COVID, shipping lines were the modern day oil merchants or the oil magnates, right? Because each container, they were basically charging on average across the world anywhere in the vicinity of 7 to 14,000 USD per container. At the height of COVID, I couldn't move a container for one of my clients from China to US when I offered 25,000 US dollars. So if I told you the shipping lines over the 4 years of COVID made a lot of money, they made a lot of money, okay? This comes to human greed. Once you have the taste of that sugar, you're always gonna want that sugar. The times now, this year, next year, and the years to come, COVID will never come again. Well, unless there's someone else, needs another battle or whatever. But the shipping lines want it. You know, they really starve for it. So one of the things they will do is when there is no demand, they will create demand. How do they do it? Well, if I'm selling a ship with only 20% margin or 20% capacity or 30%, 40%, 50%, I'll rather cancel that, ship altogether, plain sailing, so that I push all the things onto the other vessel that becomes, instead of 80%, now I've got 120% demand. Well, that 20% is going to have to pay to get the other 20% on a boat off. This is where you get the bartering system. So the shipping line is causing all that. They will slow sail, they'll blank sail, and they'll dry dock. All of these are basically manipulation by the carrier to keep the floor on the shipping lanes. And it's a great question, and I'll tell you why it's a great question. Expect this to happen for the next 2 years more and more frequently as the shipping lines struggle to keep the floor on pricing because the demand isn't there, right? The demand isn't there. And as the global south, they call it, China pivots away from the US market, the lanes that will have the boosting volume will not be the traditional lanes we're talking about. And when I mean the traditional lanes are like Australia to US, Australia to Europe, Australia to Australia, we're talking about the peripheral lanes that's going to have a massive resurgence of demand. And the shipping lines will then say, hey, if I'm making this much money from China to UAE or South America or Africa, and I'm not making much from US and Australia anymore, guess what? I'm going to pull the vessel, I'm going to go to those lanes. And then what do you get as an Australian customer? Less capacity. So then you're going to have to fight with this guy for those limited spaces. So the shipping lines will do that just to get the margin up.
And sorry, just to add to that, what you do, have a chat to us. And let's discuss, what you're doing and how we can avoid, because, there's more than one shipping line out there, right? So we could have a look at, transshipment, direct services, we could look at different options, yeah.
But again, the rule of thumb is that Murphy's Law, all right? It's often the container you can't afford to be late gets late. So how do you avoid that? Communicate with your forwarder earlier. Work with a forwarder that will help you PO manage. If you can have your information earlier, the better to us. The better we can say then, okay, we'll let our guys talk to all your factories and let them know, hey, we got PO XXX ready to this date, has to arrive this date, and we'll help you chase the factories and say, when is it ready? When is it ready? When is it ready? Right? The squeaky wheel gets the oil. This is the sort of the nitty gritty you're providing logistics do for the money that we make from them. If they're not doing it, they're not working hard enough.
Hey there, I'm Victor, supply chain consultant. So one of my customers, they import timber for their project, and they run into a lot of the stink bug issues. So their cost isn't factored in. Just wanted to get some more insight into that stuff.
Stink bug. So obviously, the solution there ultimately is fumigation. It has to either happen at origin, which is always preferable because that allows your forwarder or your shipping agent to customs clear your container ahead of time. This is going to be required for many lanes across the world. I would venture to say most. And not only for just timber products themselves, but for products that are packaged in timber packaging as well. So often even goods that are just palletized, for instance. Those pallets will require a fumigation certificate and a storage declaration, which verifies that not only were these goods fumigated, they were stored in a way post-fumigation that just didn't expose them to any more pests. So yeah, it's very important. If always, it is always preferable to have your supplier arrange this at origin, and then your supplier, we will obtain those docs and process the customs clearance. For the instances where that isn't possible, I can think of several. We work with a customer who imports prefabricated tiny homes, basically from Lithuania. Estonia, rather. There are no approved fumigation agents in Estonia that allow us to do that at origin. So what we have to do is take it off the vessel. We have to fumigate it under bond, which means we're moving it from the port to a facility while it is not yet customs cleared, processing that fumigation, and then in a matter of days, submitting that documentation to the proper authorities, and then getting that customs cleared and then on its way, whether it be to your facility or to your job site.
So just adding on to that, actually the customer, they didn't have a fumigation certificate, but it was still rejected because they said that they required a CIQ certification. Can afford help in that instance to make sure the documents are all correct, or do we need to reach out to a consultant like myself?
Both ways work, I suppose. Yeah, the forwarder can help with facilitating. We'll avoid all of that stuff. The problem you're talking about, by the time it lands on the forwarders, that somebody hasn't done their job. You know, so you're sort of picking up the pieces, so to speak. Just on the fun fact on that, New Zealand, you can't fumigate onshore. New Zealand has much stricter biosecurity than Australia. All stink bug fumigation has to be done offshore. So if by the time it gets to New Zealand and you need fumigation, it's too late. Then we reject that container.
Well, I guess as we kind of tie things up here, and we've really talked through this whole process, right? From finding the right supplier, from finding the right arrangement with your supplier, to understanding your shipping costs, to understanding the last mile component and how you actually deliver out to your job sites. Law, could you speak a little bit to the importance of having one dedicated point of contact to manage this entire process in there?
Perfect point there, Ian. I think if you're a user of freight services, traditionally our industry, how we operate for our customers from a customer experience standpoint has been the production line model, which is you get all these different departments laid out in sync, and as the job file goes on, each department touches it and moves it on and so forth. Now that works perfectly efficient if you have a product, because why? You essentially just get whoever's on the line to copy that product standard and then QC that and move on. But logistics is a service industry. How do you QC that when you've got so many hands touching it? It's a nightmare. I can't get 3 of my friends agree on a dinner venue in over a month. You know, imagine getting all these people trying to work on the same shipment efficiently. You're asking for trouble. So if you're working with a provider who's got one person who touches it from beginning to the end, who you can call and contact, have all the communication channels open, you know exactly. So when you speak to that person knows who you are, can give you an immediate response on what's going on with your shipments. You're working with the right provider because this is efficient, because this is what service is. Whereas if you talking to a provider who is a customer service person that goes, oh, let me speak to this department, it's like pulling teeth. It's like pulling teeth. So I would highly recommend whoever you guys are using, find one that will have one person that actually does the work. Not just pick up the phone, but actually does the work when you communicate. Because then that person can get you the answers very, very promptly. And then we can move on with our lives. Yeah.
Well, I do think that is a great point to end on. We appreciate everybody being here. Hope the session has been very informative. You know, at the end of the day, we're here to help. As you walk the floor, whether it be upstairs or downstairs, and find the right suppliers that are either offering a cost advantage, offering a particular product that I think is going to be game changing for your projects or for your inventory. We're here to help get those products from overseas and into your hands and into your project sites. So feel free to reach out to us at any point, whether it be moving your freight or just lending some advice. Look forward to hearing from you guys.
Yep. We also have a booth downstairs, so we're at D26. So if you want to, take this conversation further, we'll be down there. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
I might just give the folks one bonus extra bit of information for those who might be relevant. I'm not sure if anyone here is exporting from China to US. I'm not sure if anyone, maybe some of these factories will be keen to listen. They might be thinking about, like, when Trump's first term would happen, that we're transiting through Southeast Asian countries like the Vietnam and the Malaysias of the world to avoid the tariff. A bit of fun fact here is that, well, not fun fact, bonus fact, Malaysia just changed their regulations that all of these certificate of origin can only be issued by their Ministry of Interior Revenue, as opposed to their appointed agents. So this is their way of controlling this transshipment style type of movement of cargo from China via Malaysia to avoid a tariff. So by them going to their own ministry, they're the only body that can issue that pretty much curtails or cuts out all of this transshipment scenarios to avoid the tariff that US will be levying on China. Thank you very much for listening, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.